so excited that Jeremy is here to talk through all things shoes, to answer a lot of questions about shoes. But I also wanted to give an intro for who Jeremy is. And outside of being like one of my very, very, very most treasured friends, he is also one of like the most knowledgeable guys in the industry about shoes. So he lives in Boulder, Colorado. He's the manager at the Sportiva shop there. If you are on the Front Range, definitely go check out that new store location because it's beautiful. I haven't been yet, but like it's like on the list of all of the things to do. Um, yeah, so if you get a chance, go see him in person. But also he's got more than 25 years of combined experience in the outdoor and running specialty industry. So again, super knowledgeable. He understands how to apply anatomical assessments, movement patterns, and like the ins and outs of all things shoe construction. So he's here to talk to us about how to choose the right shoe, how to improve your run experience. He's also fellow road trail ultra guy, and definitely understands like why and how good shoes matter and how it can like improve your overall experience with running. So Jeremy, I'll let you just kind of pop in, say hi, do your thing, and then we'll get to the questions.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. Thanks for that intro, and thanks for having me. Before the call, I was sort of just thinking real briefly back about like when I started, and I got my first start in the running specialty industry back in 1998. So it's been a while. So it's been a long time since I've been working pretty passionately with footwear as a primary focus. So although I do work for La Sportiva, my goal with this talk today is to be rather neutral. So you're going to probably see me show you a few shoes and use those as sort of tools for the descriptions today. But my goal is to be as neutral as possible in this dialogue, so everybody can get the best fit and the best information possible. So it's a bit more unbiased, if you will. So yeah, I know footwear pretty well. I've worked with a lot of shoe companies over the years as a wear tester and prototype stuff, and also for run specialty industry for a really long time. And my focus now is primarily in trail, and I think that's most of the audience today, I believe. So that'll be our focus category footwear, and I also come from a trail running and endurance running background myself. So yeah, so let's get into it and have some fun. Talk shoes.
Cool. Yeah, I also want to say too, like hold questions for the end. We'll get to them like as more questions come up as we answer these questions. There will be time for that at the end, and or you can email Jeremy separately. He dropped his email address into the chat. It's movedbythemountains@gmail.com if you want to follow up with him individually.
Great.
Cool. All right. So I compiled all the questions everyone sent in, and I kind of broke them into categories. So the first topic that we're going to talk about is like general fit and feel of running shoes. And so we had this first question come up a couple weeks ago during a Q&A. And so I wanted to run it by you, Jeremy, because you're the expert here. So the question is, how much is it worth thinking about pronation tendencies when looking at shoes? This athlete has had some instances where matching seems to help, but a lot of long runs have been in trail shoes that don't match what a shoe store employee would typically recommend. So how much is it worth thinking about that?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think this is probably one of the biggest things that separates road running shoes from trail running shoes. So as we take a deeper dive in maybe like tech and features, this is probably the bigger question to answer when it comes to how shoes vary. I will say that the industry got started with sort of like, hey, let's make a road running shoe. Let's just make it darker. And now we have a trail running shoe. And that's kind of how trail running shoes kind of started initially. It was just sort of like a darker colored version of their road running shoe. Because they just started seeing an adaptation for that equipment being used in off trail or trail environments. So the bigger thing to talk about here is pronation tendencies, and having a background in biomechanics and stuff like that too. The thing to be mindful of is that we don't want to scare you away from pronation. It's not actually a really bad thing. To have some pronation in your feet is actually pretty good and considered normal. Overpronation, however, might sort of describe a bit more aggressive type of pronation, and that's something that you really want to be mindful of when you're talking to a running specialty store, and really assessing whether or not your foot truly has overpronation or just it pronates. It's a very naturally occurring movement in your feet. It's something that's designed to be there to help your feet help load your body, and create a shock absorption mechanism and create windlass, which creates some power and propulsion in your feet. So to have some is normal. How it applies to road versus trail, that's where the shoes start to get a little bit different for sure. And why is that? And I think the best analogy I have for everyone here is a Coke tab analogy. And the Coke tab analogy is basically a way that I describe consistent movement patterns that are repetition, or in repetition. If you grab a Coke can, you take the Coke can and you take that tab and you keep bending it in the same spot, that's inevitably where it's going to fail. And that's more analogous to road running. And the reason we share that example is because that's the movement pattern that's more again, anatomically sort of sequential, and it's repetition. And that's where some of those pronation issues can start to kind of show up a little bit for people when it comes to some ailments or alignment issues. So on the road, you're running on a surface that's consistently pretty flat. Your foot strike's very much the same thing over and over and over. And that's where that repetition comes into play. And that's where we tend to see perhaps an increase in some of the injury risk around mechanics. In a trail application, our foot strike varies a lot. The way that our feet interact with the ground varies with almost every step. You can obviously be on a very groomed, flatter, longer section of dirt. But in the trails that we all probably like to play in, there's a lot of adaptability in the way your feet have to interact with the ground. That means you're climbing, you're descending, you're on off-cambered surfaces, the footwork is more technical. And as a result, the way your movement patterns are, you don't actually end up using the same movement pattern as much. So we find in trail running shoes that those features about stability, particularly as they interact with pronation, there's less of that focus. And the reason for that is because we're trying to create some neutral stability in the shoe for both some lateral rotation or movement to the outside of your foot, or medial pronation, some sort of collapse towards the inside. What we usually see in road running shoes is we see a heavily posted shoe with something that's more supportive on the medial or the arch side, and that's designed to kind of slow down the speed at which your foot pronates. And again, that's because of the repetition nature of that type of foot strike. So when you get into trail running shoes, you're going to find that most of them are actually pretty neutral, meaning that they have pretty equal stability both medially and laterally. Some may have a slight more towards the medial side, the arch side of the foot, but as a general rule, they're usually pretty neutral.
That's awesome. I've always wondered about that, because with I don't know, with like the difference in terrain, it's just like, yeah, thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
I think with that in mind, like when we talk about going in and finding like the like quote unquote right shoe, like what should it feel like to run in shoes that are right for you? Is it subjective? Is there like an objective feel that we're looking for?
Yeah, I would say, we all have our personal preferences, and the way some of us are salty, some of us are sweet. And I think there's some preferences in the way that we sort of just interact with the clothing that we wear, the textiles, the way things fit. Some people like more relaxed fabrics, and some people like to feel really nice and snug in the environment that they're wearing their vest or their shirt or whatever. So the short answer there is there's not really the perfect like right fit. I will say that like a running shoe, a trail running shoe specifically, should almost kind of disappear on your feet. And what I mean by that is that ultimately, like, the shoe should just be kind of feel like it's just there, it's doing its job. but you're not having to interact much with the shoe. It should just sort of move and be a part of your body, and it should sort of, again, just disappear as you wear the shoe. Um, you know, when we think about the fits in trail running shoes, we have to kind of think about how we're going to be using the shoe and in what environments as well. So the more technical terrain that you might be on, you might want a shoe that does sort of anchor your foot in a little bit more to help minimize your foot moving within the shoe, particularly on terrain that's, again, steeper or more variable as well. As we're approaching perhaps longer distance runs, we also want to take a focus on making sure the sizing is actually correct. This is a bit nuanced and individual amongst shoe brands. So one of the best things I have advice here on fit is don't focus on a number. So sort of let go of some of the expectations about I'm an 8. I've always been an 8. There's no way I'm going to wear a size 10. If you can let go of some of the sort of sizes, things around your number value when it comes to the size of the shoe, and focusing on the fit and the feel of the shoe, you're going to have a better overall experience as well. But as we get into some of those longer efforts, particularly as you're pursuing, 50Ks, 50 milers, and things that are even longer distance, you really need to play the long game in your fit and make sure that you're also building in a little bit of safety space, particularly in the toe box environment, the front of the shoe, an area where your foot has a tendency to have a greater amount of expansion. So always make sure you're kind of tuning your quiver of shoes to kind of match the terrain, the distances, and or the conditions of the environment as well. But I will say a shoe that kind of gets on and disappears on your feet is a really good sign. So as you're putting shoes on your feet, really truly move around in them a little bit in the store, run around inside if they let you, get on a treadmill, that kind of thing. And then just kind of really start to try to connect to the shoe that way.
Yeah, I love that. And I think like with that too comes the question of like there's so many different shoe brands and like every model has a different like millimeter like heel to toe drop. And so can you talk a little bit about how like the drop of the shoe affects the comfort, feel, stability, or like how does that work?
Yeah. So drop is a still very hot topic. And a lot of this came by virtue of a very notable book, Born to Run, which sort of like really kind of broke this mold around like what it meant to like wear, to be shod or to wear shoes, and the spirit of shoes. It's like, do we really need them? Like, what will we do if we didn't have shoes? And if we didn't have them, is that the right thing? Is that what do our mechanics start to do and change when we wear shoes? So when we're talking about drop, for those of you that don't know what this is, drop is basically a measurement from basically 2 points in a shoe, more or less. And just to make it really simple, it's basically like the stack height of the shoe that's represented in the heel. So like the highest point of the heel to the highest point, if you will, in the toe. And the relationship there is between the two. So let's just say, for the purpose of this exercise, this heel is 34 millimeters tall. And then let's say that the toe is 28 millimeters tall. So that means there's an amount of material between your foot and the ground is 34 and 28. So then you have 6 millimeters of what's called drop. That means that the heel drops to the toe by about 6 millimeters. So drop is a really hot topic in measurement, because a lot of people are coming from this like, okay, well, if I don't wear a shoe, then my feet are now considered zero drop. That means my feet are just connected to the earth and I'm at zero, because there's no relationship difference between my heel and my toe now. They're flat. So the gold standard became zero. Like, what is zero drop? Well, that means there's no difference between the heel and the toe if I build the shoe. So then you get these like millimeter differences, and that's how the industry measures them. So in this particular example, I showed you a shoe that was like 6 millimeters of difference between the two. The science out there is sort of, again, still sort of like not totally in the weeds, but there's some science to support the fact that a little bit of a lower drop in a shoe does promote a little bit more natural mechanics, the way that our bodies were sort of intended to kind of move. So we've not been wearing shoes as long as we've been around. but we've been wearing shoes long enough to sort of have some adaptations in the way that our bodies now move. Drop does play a more critical role again in a little bit more of that like road culture and a little bit less in the trail culture. And that's again because of the variability that our feet and bodies interact with the surfaces on trails. So that we know. And once you start kind of zeroing in, not to imply that zero is the sweet spot, but once you start sort of focusing on your drop preferences a little bit, I would say play with some of the shoes that are in those like 6 to 8 range, 4 range, something in there, and then add in a zero drop shoe too to see how your body reacts. I will say that like there is a little bit of a progression, and you want to be mindful of going a little bit too rapid into shoes that are less and less drop. So that's my take on drop and how it impacts the body, etc.
Cool. Yeah, I think like when we talk about zero drop, a lot of like one brand that's like pretty well known for zero drop is the Ultras. And so
Yep.
if anybody runs an Ultras, like I think it's safe to say that just assume it's a zero drop, but you can always look in the specs before you like
Yeah.
buy the shoe as well. Um, so the next question that I want to touch on is like when we're looking for a daily trainer, what are the requirements for that? Like what's the best thing to look for?
Yeah, your daily trainer or your daily driver should be the shoe that's kind of your standby. It should be your sort of Ford F-150, if you will, the shoe that you know, or a couple pairs that you know that like are just really reliable, really consistent. They're likely not the most technical one in your quiver, and they're likely not the lightest one in your quiver. They are kind of in that middle road, if you will, just sort of the old reliable. You tend to put most of your volume on these, so it is important that they're still a good experience in the fit. And then they match just kind of the conditions in which you find yourself running on mostly. So make sure that they're sort of equipped for the terrain that you're going to likely use most often in your backyard or whatever routes you like to go to with the most frequency. If there's nothing else, that's the best proving grounds for your shoe, and the one that you're going to use with more frequency. So those are the ones to also, if you're going to put some energy into tracking some information, those are probably the ones to put some energy into, the ones that you're starting to kind of log a lot of miles for. So if you're using any training programs, whether it be Training Peaks or Strava or whatever you're using to track your miles, it would be a smart move to sort of start pinning mileage down on those shoes, so that you can be mindful of starting to sort of phase them out and rotate in, so that you're sort of working with a little bit of a healthier life cycle of your footwear, because it will sneak up on you very quickly. We get surprised by a lot of volume, how quickly it adds up. And I usually just share this really quick when it comes to like the daily driver thing, is it's like, if you're doing 30 miles a week, give or take, some of us doing a bit more, but even at 30 miles a week, let's just say you're doing 120 miles a month. In 4 months, how many miles do you have? You almost have 500 miles on a pair of running shoes, in 4 months. So it can add up pretty quick. Yeah. So in 4 months, people are like, man, they barely last me a year. It's like, well, let's just talk about mileage a little bit, and what foam can do and how long can it last, and all the stuff that really happens. So that's why tracking can be really valuable for you as well.
Yeah, so I think with tracking, like, do you have any recommendations on like how to switch up the shoes from day to day? Like, if you really like one model, like, should you buy like 3 pairs of one model and just switch them out, or like switch up the heel to toe drop? Like, what's your recommendation there?
I think your body does respond well to having a good rotation in your quiver. It keeps your body fresh. It kind of keeps you guessing a little bit. Little known fact that if you're running on most standard shoes these days, what I mean by standard is, I mean like shoes that aren't using plates or super foams or things like that. Even some of the super foam shoes, the midsole of the foam takes about 48 hours to fully rebound. So what that means is after you've worn a shoe for a pretty solid run, let's say somewhere between 2 hours or more, it takes almost 2 days for that foam to actually decompress. So if you're wearing a shoe that frequently, like back to back, you may find that you're actually wearing a shoe as a daily shoe that doesn't have quite as much snap as it did the day prior. So they need a little bit of time to kind of off gas and to decompress, and especially as they get older. So something to look for is like much like us when we get a little bit older, we start to wrinkle, and the foam on midsoles on shoes will start to reveal sort of where they're breaking down, and a lot of wrinkling in the midsole shows you as the user that it's compressing, but it's not bouncing back, and that bounce back component is really important to sort of the energy return and shock absorption value of the shoe. So
I did not know that. I didn't know it takes 48 hours for it to like fully rebound. That's so cool.
yeah,
Um, does that
it
differ
fits around there,
between
and
EVA? Does that differ between types of foam?
it does. Yeah. The We're seeing a shift obviously towards like very soft right now in soft shoes with different ways of either injecting foam or compressing foam. So there's different ways to mold running shoe foams these days. The hot topic is in foam right now is nitrogen, and super foam shoes, if you will. I'm using super foam just generically, but um, shoe companies can, rather than just adding air into the foam, they can actually add liquid nitrogen in, and then they'll extract the liquid, and then they'll be left with nitrogen bubbles in the shoe, and that lightens it up significantly. It creates better energy return and makes them last a little bit longer. So we're seeing advancements in the way that we can build foam now. But even then, there's different densities. And the general rule of thumb is the firmer the foam, the longer the shoe will last, but it will have less of that kind of plushy, marshmallowy, cushy vibe. Whereas the more plush, cushy vibe shoes may not last as long, but give you that sort of like initial step in sort of feel that you might feel really attached to initially. So,
Yeah. So I think with that, like that brought up a question. If we're trying, like, if we get our shoes like really muddy, right? Or like if we need to clean our shoes, how do we do that without ruining them? Like without like
yeah,
breaking foam?
yeah. Don't. You just want to hand wash your stuff. Just get a hose in there and blow out as much as you can out of those. Take the laces out, take the insole out, and just get some pressure or water in there just to get things moving around a little bit. I don't advocate for like scrubbing a bunch on the shoe. You're just going to be wearing some of the textile down a little bit, maybe sooner than you need to. A really soft brush like a toothbrush or something if you really want to get into the detail. You might find that some systems like these BOA systems here, which require like a little bit of maintenance. You push the BOA system in and have to turn to tighten. Some of these might need a little bit of attention to detail as you get. These get really the Dyneema, the cable gets like really kind of rigid and kind of stiff from like your sweat, dirt, debris, stuff like that. So sometimes you have to perform a little bit of maintenance on some moving parts. But as a general rule, you don't really want to agitate the shoe a lot, honestly. And then do not put them in the dryer. Just let them in some of these hotter climates. You literally just set them in a shady area. Again, not in direct sunlight, but a cool shady area with a little bit of air and movement, and let them just air dry. You just don't want to get them into a dryer, which could deaccelerate and break down the adhesives, like the things that hold the shoe together. It can get too hot in there, and then you can start to get delamination issues and stuff like that. So,
Oh, that's good advice.
yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like kind of tangenting off of the midsole and the foam, we got a couple questions about inserts and like should everyone be running with inserts? How do you know if you need inserts? And then if you do need them, how do you know which kind that you need?
Yeah, great question. There's some orthopedic kind of components to some of this too. So I'll raise my hand first and say I'm not a doctor, but there's definitely some great over-the-counter orthotic options that will provide the wearer with increased stability, particularly, and perhaps even some more cushioning. There are also custom made orthotics by licensed podiatrists that can really address maybe some unique nuances in your mechanics. That particularly is great for people who have notable discrepancies between like left and rights, where there's a true like anatomical difference between the way their feet function, leg length discrepancies, pelvic tilts, things like that, where a real true like custom orthotic can kind of come in and equalize things, if you will. The goal is to try to create some equalization in the way that your body functions. Not to imply that symmetry is perfect, but ultimately that like if there's any big discrepancies, somebody that specializes in the orthopedic industry can help neutralize that. Over the counter orthotics, there's a ton of options. There's so many choices. It can be actually quite overwhelming, to be honest. I will say this, even from a brand that specializes in making very technical footwear, you are not buying the insole that comes with the shoe. And what I mean by that is there's very little cost deployed in the insole. And that's because we've seen a shift in aftermarket purchases. So a lot of brands are just kind of like, you know what, we're not going to put a ton of money into this footbed because somebody's just going to take it out and throw in their own footbed anyway. So the one that comes with the shoe, rock it for a couple weeks. If it feels good, then so be it. If you've got a tried and true system that you know you've used and it's worked in other brands or other shoes, pop them in. When you're trying shoes, make sure you have those, or you're working with a retailer or a company that lets you get them home and put the orthotics in later and fit them up. I will say this, when you're buying inserts, particularly ones if you're looking for over-the-counter arch support, make sure that you're not buying them out of the box just based on the size. And what I mean by that is like if you're an 11 shoe or an 8 shoe, don't just buy that size assuming that that's the right one. When you buy these things, you're going to actually what I want you to do is I want you to take them out of the box. I want you to set them down on the ground. I want you to put your feet on them. And what I want you to do is I want you to say, does that arch match my foot bridge? Does that arch actually look like it's in sync with the shape of my feet? Does it look like it cups my heel right? And does it fit my longitudinal arch, like the long portion of my arch? Does it look like it's a good match? If I'm building a rainbow, I want that rainbow to kind of just kiss all the edges in there. And then you're going to find that you probably likely will end up buying or getting a larger size. And that just shows that it kind of really matches the arch better. And then all you got to do is take the old insert out, put it on top, trace the edges a little bit, and just trim a little bit of that excess off. And you put that other one inside your shoe. So don't make the mistake of just buying what you think is off the shelf, your size. Get it out, put your foot on top of it, stand in front of a mirror, and make sure it looks like it fits your arch right.
Mm-hmm. And then also like take the old arch out before you put the new arch in. Don't stack
them. Yeah, typically you're going to want to remove the factory insole. There's usually not enough space. Now, some people do need to pick up volume in their shoe, and that's kind of a tricky one. Mm-hmm. So you can keep the old one in and stack the other one on top if you need to.
Okay, cool. Sweet. That's so helpful. I feel, yeah, that's so helpful. We did get a lot of questions about plated shoes. And there are a lot of models now that come with the carbon fiber plates. And so, yeah, I mean, we can just like kick it off with, how often should we be running in plated shoes?
Man, yeah, I've got opinions here, but I think the thing to be, let's just talk about what are plated shoes real quick and talk about kind of their advantages, their pros or cons, etc. And I'll just drop this really kind of funny story, but there used to be a brand that was actually called Spira, Spira, and their sort of like little claim to fame was that their shoes are illegal. And that's because they actually used to build in this like actual like plate into their shoe. And back in the day, it was actually considered a mechanical advantage. And as a result, like if you want to race in their pair of shoes, that you wouldn't be able to like take the money home or whatever. So it was kind of cool. It was kind of edgy because it was like, we build shoes that are illegal basically. Right. So we've seen a huge shift in the acceptance of this equipment because it is providing a mechanical advantage, and that's truly just kind of how this thing works. But we talked a little bit about windlass, which is again a mechanical mechanism that that anything can use to kind of generate power and propulsion, and our feet do that on their own. So then add in something like a plate into a running shoe. And when we load a plate in a running shoe, we're creating some tension. And when we're creating tension, we're creating then power and propulsion. So the mechanical advantage of a plated shoe is that it's going to basically catapult your foot forward. That's the most basic way to sort of describe it. So is it a good thing? I mean, it makes the shoe faster. It makes the wearer faster in a lot of ways too. Is it the right thing for us? Like, how often should we be wearing them? I guess as much as you can tolerate, as much as your body allows you to wear them. And if it makes sense for the terrain that you're going to be on, and if that type of feel like really is kind of your jam. Having worn carbon plated and plated shoes myself, they feel very foreign. They feel very odd to wear. And in a lot of circumstances, they can also feel rather disconnecting. We can talk about other ways that other shoes work too that create that same sort of feeling, particularly like a lot of maximal, very tall shoes. So, we talked about drop, but one of the things we didn't talk about is like you can have a zero drop shoe and it can be very tall, and you can have a zero drop shoe and it can be very low. So the construction of the shoe doesn't dictate whether or not it's high drop or low drop in that way. So maximal shoe, tons of cushioning. But what it does, it definitely decreases ground feel, the ability to have proprioception, the ability to feel what you're running on. And plated shoes kind of do that too. That plate is going to reduce ground feel. Might feel like a little bit of rock protection, but at the end of the day, your feet aren't working the same way that they do in kind of a normal shoe environment, if you will. So do what you can, tolerate what you can. And I still think that it's advantageous to still, have a quiver of shoes and rotate in some other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So with the carbon plated shoe and like correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not totally sure here, but like with the rocker of the shoe, I don't know if I'm like in my own echo chamber of like carbon plated shoes here or something, but it seems like the rocker of carbon plated shoes are a little bit more aggressive. Is that true or just there's a little bit more energy return or push off?
Yeah. So the most of the like again, kind of the lump super shoes under this umbrella, a lot of them are very high rockered shoes. The design theory here is that when we've increased propulsion, we want to minimize how much shoe is making contact with the ground. So the higher rocker shoe allows less shoe to be interfacing with the ground, which reduces ground force, ground time, all this stuff that kind of inherently slows down foot strike. So when we rock our shoe, we're decreasing the amount of shoe on the ground. And then as a result, the rocker nature cultivates more propulsion. So it gets you on and off the toe faster than a shoe that has less rocker. So it's almost like falling forward. So the shoes kind of tip towards the front, which cultivates the spirit of rolling forward off the shoe, particularly advantageous when the cadence is higher and perhaps someone's more fatigued. So as you're tired, like more rocker can be really, really helpful because there's less effort on your part to move through the shoe, if you will. So yeah, rocker's a hot topic as well. And rocker is like a rocking chair for those of us who don't know. But basically it's kind of the way that a shoe tips up in the front. And this is a very stiff super shoe from a brand. And it's got a plate in here and it's really rockered off the toe. So that cultivates a lot of spirited sort of roll off on the front. Trail shoes can have that too. So this trail shoe here has a lot of rocker, really gets off the front there as well. So it's something that really kind of cultivates rolling off the toe. It can be advantageous, particularly too in environments where the terrain's steeper. It's kind of nice to have a lot of rocker because it aids in this approach angle. So as your toe approaches like a really steep interface, if the shoe's rockered, it can get on steeper surfaces faster too, which is kind of nice. So
Oh, cool.
they are in some ways kind of less stable. So if we're talking about some pros and cons here, again, reduced ground field. The con here is that you are going to have less reaction time from your feet. And if you can't react to the surfaces that you're putting your feet down onto, you're more likely to turn ankles, miss foot placement, generate power in the right ways that maybe you need to react to the changes in the surfaces. And as a result, it can also be truthfully more fatiguing on your body. I'll see if I can figure out how to drop this link in, and maybe I'll share it with you after the chat. But back in 2018, there was a white paper from the Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine that did a research study on maximal shoes by contrast to just traditional stack shoes. And the study basically proved that the influence of maximal running shoes on mechanics before and after 5K runs, everybody had way more muscle fatigue in their bodies with maximal shoes than they did with normal height running
Whoa.
shoes.
That's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Is that like just because you're on your toes more because there's more give and it's like I think the analogy I would
So,
be like, does it how
so
does it
here's,
work?
yeah. So I love analogies. So here's another one. Let's say you're going to change a light bulb and you need to change a light bulb in the ceiling. It's a lot easier to stand on a chair than it is to stand on a mattress to change
Okay.
that light bulb.
Yeah.
And so those taller, softer shoes, what was actually happening was that basically the way that I can describe this the best is that people's bodies were craving contact with the ground. And as a result, they were pressing harder through the shoe to try to get their feet to connect so that they could create load and create feel and create propulsion. So they were actually having more muscle fatigue as a result because they were impacting the ground force impact was higher in the maximal shoes than it was in the more traditionally stacked shoes.
That's wild. Okay. So then even like with a rocker, like a lot of athletes who run with like a high rockered shoe, um, often complain about like sore calves. Is that just because you're like on your toes more?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's you're forcing the foot to move through its gait cycle at a speed that your body is maybe not used to. Similar to a super low drop shoe, like you have to extend the Achilles when you're wearing a lower drop shoe. So your Achilles, your heel is sort of again craving make contact with the earth, and so your heel sort of like extends itself to try to get down. So you tend to find your Achilles kind of lengthening and stretching, and the calves getting also really sore. We talk about rocker. Rocker speeds up the transition of the foot beyond what it kind of normally used to do, and as a result, like you tend to get loaded up on the toes more and you use the metatarsal area in propulsion area. You would think it would kind of help like take some of that off, but the reality is like you're spinning up your feet a little bit faster than just what they're used to.
That's yeah, fascinating. Okay. So I think with that being said, then like when does it make sense to use like a plated shoe for races versus no plate? Putting aside like whether the terrain is technical or not.
Yeah.
But I think there's been some talk about how like for more like middle of the pack, back of the pack runners, there's diminishing returns for plated shoes, and that the plates can actually like cause more discomfort if you're going to be hiking more than you're going to be running.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are all maybe familiar with the 4%. Like, where did the 4% shoe come in? Like, what's that metric? Well, the metric was a 4% speed efficiency. So people could run 4% faster was sort of the most generic way to sort of imply that the shoe was designed to work that way. Right time, right place. You don't drive your Ferrari around all day to go get the groceries. this is probably not the for, this is, probably similar to like the plated shoe. Like you should wear it if you're going to run in it. It's kind of one of those things. It's like, you gotta, if you're going to wear it for a race, yeah, please try it first, test it out, because race day is not the day to just decide you're going to lace up that $300 pair of shoes and just try to rip. So yeah, I mean, make sure you can get some time in them so that you're used to just the way they're going to move, and just be prepared to wear something that's likely going to be just different. So I'm not bastardizing them. I think that they're a great technology. I love technology and running shoes. Anything to make us faster in the right ways, is I'm all for. So if you're wanting to explore or tiptoe into that world, please do so. But at the same time, just be mindful of like what your transition looks like, and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, that's really good advice. Um, that's really good advice. I ran in a pair of plated Adidas shoes last weekend and had like tried them out before, but it feels a lot different, especially on trails where like I fell a couple times because I kept like my toe would catch and I kept like Supermaning all over the trail. It was really embarrassing. So
well,
nothing
did
to
you like it? Do you like them? Does it make you feel faster?
Yeah, they made me feel a lot faster. I felt like there was a lot more energy return
Yeah.
with that rocker that kind of like pulls you forward, especially on the uphills. Like the uphills felt really good, which was cool.
Yeah, that increased rocker, again, it just sort of interfaces with that steeper terrain. We call that an approach angle. It's commonly used in like off-road terms, but if there's like a bumper removed and it's a high angle thing, then it can get onto higher angle surfaces faster. And a lot of rocker helps with that. And the additional propulsion uphill, like when you load it, boing, it's more springy. So you're going to feel that snap and that turnover for sure, which tends to kind of increase cadence and make your feet feel snappier and all that kind of stuff too, for sure. But, um, you know, some things in excess and everything in moderation. So.
Yeah, for sure. So one other question that I had is like, I went to a race recently. I was at Run Rabbit Run, and one of our athletes there had this like bump on the front of his foot from where he would like tie his laces, and I had
Yeah.
never heard it referred to as lace bite before.
Yeah.
We kind of like tried to problem solve different ways to get around it. Um,
Mhm.
is there a different way to lace your shoe to avoid that? Or is it sort of one of those things that like once it happens, it's just always there and never goes away?
Yeah. So, I mean, you put a seatbelt on one way, and you should always put your seatbelt on the same way every time. But laces are not, you don't have to do what the manufacturer says. So, laces can be just Wild West. So, please like explore lace patterns that work for your feet. There's a great wealth of information out there on the interwebs. So, poke around and see if something shows up for you. But you know, the point of that to be is that like you're not beholden to the sequence of the laces built into the shoe. So you can start later in your lacing harness. So like if there's a lot of pressure in the front of the shoe, you don't need to start right away with your laces up at the very front. If you need to, you can actually skip an eyelet or two from the front of the shoe if that gives the foot some breathing room or some relief in that area. Was this happening early for your athlete or later in the day?
Early. I think he said after like the first couple of miles, it would start to like bite. And then there's just like, you know, never really went
Yeah,
away.
that's not a good start. You would hope that it doesn't happen until later, but if it's happening right away, it's like, oh, that's a total bummer. But lace tension is really important. The laces are critical to anchoring your feet into the shoe. As we get into steeper terrain, we tend to want to crank those laces down a little bit so the shoe can feel a little bit more confident. So it kind of really keeps us centered on top of the shoe. You know, you do want to be mindful of over tightening. Over tightening is the nemesis of reduced blood flow in the shoe. So over tightening can restrict the top of the foot, which is where the majority of your blood is going to come into your feet. So be really mindful of like over tightening, because that is an area on the shoe that won't back off until you stop and loosen it and tie it again. So, and that sucks to have to do, but if and when you have to do it, you really just need to back off the lacing and start all over. But there's a number of different patterns and sequences to deploy to kind of work with your unique shapes of your feet. There are way more feet out there than there are shoes, so you really have to kind of be playful in the way that you again, you pick your shoe and the way that you lace them and all that kind of stuff as well. I'm just kind of doing a quick little lace here on a pair of shoes, a relace, just to show you what's called a box lace or a window lace. And this is
Cool.
commonly used for people who need to gain a little bit of real estate in the upper part of the shoe. So like whether it's the instep area, which is the top of your arch, or in the toe box or something like that, just to kind of show you some patterning. So here's a box lace. So I've just used the existing like lower eyelets here, just the standard eyelets at the toe area of the shoe. But then what I've done is I've just, rather than crossing, I've just skipped and went straight up each side on here. So rather than crisscrossing in the middle right here, this is just called a box lace. You've just made like a little window or a box right there. And that just allows the shoe to kind of get some breathing room, like in the top of in the toe box area or above the arch or the instep area here as well. So an easy way to just like quickly adjust the shoe pressure if there's a lot, notably like in the toe box or the front of the shoe right there. So that's one easy, quick one. The other one is just these like runner's knots, which are commonly used to help. Sorry, this camera thing is, it's really hard to do. I'm like mirrored and backwards. But you just build in these little loops here at the end with the lace. And then what you can do is this allows you to kind of really anchor the shoe around the collar. So you can really tighten the shoe around the collar and help to decrease like heel slip. So it really kind of helps to kind of anchor the shoe around the foot. You're basically kind of creating a smaller like kind of choke point across the instep area, the top of the foot. And that also helps to kind of hold tension in the top of the shoe here as well. It's called a runner's knot, very common, because what's kind of neat about it is if the shoe comes untied, the tension stays on the shoe. So like if you really were in like a hot foot race, you could just keep running and the shoe would kind of stay kind of still tension around your foot.
Yeah. So with
So
that, with like on trail shoes, but like for like Matt mentioned in the chat, like on the Vaporflies, they have offset lacing. Does that help specifically with that like lace bite, or is it something else that it sort of
it does,
offsets?
yeah. Offset lacing is a pretty cool way of just having a kind of unique lace harness. Usually the pressure is on the very top of of the foot where the highest point is. So if there's pressure, it's usually on the very, very tippy top of the shoe or top of the foot. So offset lacing, which would mean basically like the lace pattern rather than being down the middle, is kind of offset to the side just slightly. Almost anatomical or offset, kind of wraps the inside of the foot or the inside and or the outside, kind of depends on the brand strategy a little bit. But the offset lacing can help decrease that top load pressure on top of the foot. It's commonly used in other applications too, like climbing shoes and stuff too. But the running shoe industry, a few brands will do that as well.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I think, oh my God, I feel like I've just like learned so much. I feel like I'm just like leaving class or something. Like my brain is so full.
Yeah.
Especially with the lacing techniques. That's so cool. And I know Chris just popped back on and he was the athlete who was having some like lace bite issues. So we'll dial that
Yeah.
in. The last question that I started with before I hit record is Anton back?
Is Anton back? Yeah. I think Anton's back. I think the prophecy is coming back. Yeah. He's fit. He's real fit right now and feeling the stoke and has built a pretty amazing base. And I think his body's fired up to do some big things. And I think he's also just he's somebody who's driven by some purpose and some mission here. So I think that's something that's really kind of thriving in him right now. Is he's got some boxes to tick. And so yeah, we actually he was at the shop a couple weeks ago, and was talking about races and race strategy and all the kind of normal things that he talks about. He was far more engaging and prepared to speak. But he's excited. And I think that, he's got some fun things on deck. Yeah.
Cool. That's so exciting. We've got a couple minutes left, so if anybody has any follow-up questions that they want to ask now, unmute yourselves and let's go for it. Otherwise, if you guys have questions you want to email Jeremy about later, I will follow up in an email with his email address, but it's also in the chat. It's movedbythemountains at gmail.com. So let's hear your questions.
Hey, Jeremy, it's Jacob. Can you hear me?
I can. Hey, Jacob.
Hey. So I've had an issue where the heel collar rubs against my Achilles, the Jackal being a really bad offender.
Yep.
Is that just the heel collar design, or is there a way, like a lacing technique, in order to minimize that?
Yeah, and because I know the shoe pretty intimately, is it the Jackal 1 or the Jackal 2?
It was the Jackal 1, but I get it in everything from like my pair of Vans that I have to like the Pegasus, not the new Pegasus 41s, but like the old Pegasus 5 trails.
Yeah, what you want to look at, and we will admit when we make a mistake. The Jackal 1 had a little bit of a stiffer heel collar to it than we originally spec'd, but the Jackal 2 got better. And in fact, anybody who had the issue on the first didn't have it in the second. But if your problem is consistent, almost kind of regardless, something to look for is making sure that you have something that's got a pretty good scallop to it. And scalloping is this kind of curvature that's represented here in the back of the shoe. So just look at the shoe construction really quick. Not quick, but look at the shoe construction, and you want to favor one that's a little bit more scalloped. So it's going to have a little bit more of a scoop or cutout here in the top. Do you see that notable shape difference? Okay, cool. And the other would be just to make sure that you're also looking at kind of the heel rake, which would kind of be the angle here, the back of the heel cup. We have kind of more L-shaped heels and we have more C-shaped heels. And you're probably going to want to favor a little bit more of an L shape, something that's slightly more vertical in construction. So a little bit more vertical and less curved in. So there's something like that. And then there's something like this is not a good example. It's not that much different. But when I weigh this shoe flat, see how it's more angled? So it's kind of steeper like that. When I weigh this one flat, see how it's a little bit more vertical? I don't know if you can see that difference. So maybe a little bit more vertical heel cup, a little bit less C, a little bit less steep, and then look for that kind of scalloping. Absolutely make sure that you feel like you've got enough length in your shoe, because we tend to just think of the toes when we're thinking of length. But if the shoe is also a little bit too short, you're going to get compressed in the back of the heel cup. And that compression in the back of the heel cup will also increase friction and pressure. So something to be mindful there in the overall shape of the shoe.
That's a really good question.
Hey, Jeremy, I have a quick question. Thanks for spending your time with us on this Wednesday night. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So I've gotten some Hoka Tecton 2s for a little while. I got like 2 pairs of them right now. I do have a quiver, so I have other shoes that don't have plates, but I do find myself running in the Hokas a lot. Like you talked about kind of nuances of plates. I don't know if there's like common knowledge out there of like, don't wear a plate, 70% of the time, only wear it when you're going to race or want to run, tempo. It's okay if you wear it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, where we landed on this topic was that ultimately everything in moderation to some extent. I do feel like the plated shoes can add a mechanical advantage, and I definitely think that they're something to consider in your quiver, particularly if you are actually somebody who can benefit from it. And this is no implication about people's eliteness or fitness or speed or anything like that. But there is a sweet spot, I feel like, and that, I feel like that plated shoe, can add some value to our racing experience, but I don't think it should be the daily driver for a lot of us. I sort of share this analogy about the Lamborghini. Like, you're just not going to drive that one all the time, and you're going to break it out when you want to go fast and have fun. You do want to practice driving it or running in that shoe, right? So that your body can get adapted to it. But I don't think it's the shoe and the rotation that we should be wearing all the time, because we need to keep our feet engaged. We need to keep our feet working, and those types of shoes kind of turn some of that off. So be mindful of using your feet in ways too that still are there to be used. Really important muscle group for our running, and making sure that we're able to kind of connect to the surfaces that we're running on.
Cool. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Jeremy, I want to be respectful of your time. I'm so thrilled and honored that you joined us. I just love seeing you. So I wish I lived closer. But yeah, so again, dropped your email in the chat if there's any follow-up questions, but I'll post this up to our newsletter as well for some other athletes who couldn't make it tonight. But yeah, definitely reach out, follow Jeremy on Instagram. He's hilarious. He's also incredibly knowledgeable, but ask him all the questions. So take advantage.
Yeah. And I'll share that study the white paper that I dropped as well. I'll share that with you, and you can get out to the group. Thanks for having me. Super great to see you. Great group. Thanks for being so engaged. And I'm sure that if you didn't make it here, you'll still enjoy watching this. And yeah, my email's there. Feel free to reach out if you just have a basic question. I'm happy to help. And you guys, you guys are you're amongst great people. So have fun.
Well, have a good night, you guys. Thanks again, Jer. I'll talk to y'all soon.
All right, bye. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.